The smell in the Cutter's Bend Territorial Land Office on the morning of September 12, 1887, was the specific oppressive scent of bureaucratic certainty, the dry, alkaline tang of paper that had been sitting in cedar drawers for too long, the greasy residue of coal oil from lamps that burned through the night, and the faint, bitter odor of stale tobacco that clung to the heavy velvet curtains. Sheriff Aldous Crane was standing behind the high walnut counter, his hands resting on a ledger, with the particular confidence of a man who believed that ink on a page was more powerful than the blood in a person's veins. He did not look up when May Voss entered. He waited for the brass clock on the mantel to chime the hour, a sound that resonated through the room like the strike of a gavel, marking the exact moment a person's history was scheduled to become the county's property. May Voss stood in the center of the office, her boots caked with the white silt of the northern wash. She was 25 years old, but she carried the specific quality of stillness that came from spending more time watching horizons than watching people. A practiced management of stillness that made her seem like a permanent fixture of the room rather than a visitor. She held the leather strap of her father's survey satchel with both hands, her thumbs tracing the deep, familiar grooves where his fingers had rested for 30 years. She did not take the chair offered by the clerk. She had learned in her father's notebooks that in rooms where the law is being read against you, standing is the only way to keep your gravity. The sheriff finally looked up, his eyes the color of a winter sky over a frozen lake. He told her that the Voss claim in the Red Canyon was being vacated. He cited a specific territorial ordinance regarding the lack of visible improvements on the land, a legal instrument that ignored the 30 years her father had spent protecting the watershed in favor of the cattle syndicates that wanted the grass. He gave her until the first frost to clear her stock and her equipment. He spoke with the flat, unhurried voice of a man who found the destruction of a legacy neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but simply a matter of correct filing. May watched the way the sheriff's fingers tapped the ledger. She did not look at the deputies standing by the door with their hands resting on their gun belts. She looked at the specific grain of the wood on the counter and remembered the first time Crane had come to the canyon, 3 years ago, when her father was still alive, and the drought was just beginning to crack the clay of the valley floor. Crane had been louder then, more prone to showing his badge. Now he didn't need to show it. He assumed the badge was understood. May felt no heat in her chest, only the cold, clinical clarity of a person who had spent 3 years preparing for a conversation she knew she would eventually lose. She had already solved the problem of the sheriff's warrants. She had solved it by reading the 5th notebook, the one her father had titled The Architecture of the Shadow. If you have ever stood in a room where someone tried to tell you that your history was a liability and your knowledge was a crime, then you understand the weight of the air in that office. This channel is built for the survivors, the ones who know that silence is a weapon and patience is a shield. We preserve the stories of the frontier that were too quiet for the history books. Honor the legacy of those who didn't back down by subscribing to Old West legends now. Join a brotherhood that understands that a person's word and their work are the only things that truly endure. May turned and walked out of the land office without a single word of protest. She did not go to the general store to buy supplies she couldn't afford. She did not go to the livery to argue for more time. She walked toward the edge of the settlement, heading north toward the high wall canyons, where the air was thin and the stone was honest. She was moving toward the only terrain the sheriff couldn't claim with a signature, carrying her father's satchel and the specific intelligence that the most effective cage is the one the guard doesn't realize he is standing inside. The sheriff believed he was the hunter, but for 3 years May Voss had been his architect. Every time Crane sent a deputy to monitor the Voss property and May redirected them through the lower passes, the sheriff recorded it as successful oversight. He didn't realize that May was conditioning him. She was using a technique her father had documented in the section of the notebooks titled The Mirrored Path. It was a method of training a pursuer to trust their own assumptions. She would leave visible tracks near the water sources she wanted the cattle syndicate to find, sources that would dry up by mid-August, while she moved her horses through the shatter path, a route of solid basalt that left no track signature even for a seasoned scout. She knew the precise calorie requirements of the sheriff's horses. She knew the exact depth of the dust on the South Road and how it affected the speed of a mounted posse. Most importantly, she understood the psychological limit of the sheriff's certainty. The horses Crane provided for his men were strong, heavy-set animals bred for the flat, grassy plains of the East. They were animals of momentum, not animals of terrain. May's horses, the Ghost Line, were terrain readers. Her father had spent 3 decades breeding for a specific bone density and a respiratory capacity that allowed them to sustain effort in the oxygen-thin air of the high rims. They didn't just move over the ground, they integrated with it. They moved with a short cadence stride that minimized the weight impact on shifting shale, a technique that allowed them to vanish into the terrain even when they were in plain sight. During that 3rd year, the sheriff's obsession with the Voss property became a slow-motion catastrophe for the county. He believed that if he could just seize the ghost horses, he could sell the breeding rights to the territorial cavalry and secure his political future. He didn't understand that a ghost horse was not a machine. It was a partner in a dialogue with the canyon. May would watch from the hidden ledges, peering through her father's brass glass, as Crane's men struggled through the summer heat. She wasn't avoiding them. She was waiting for the one thing the Arizona Territory always delivered when men became too confident in their maps, the great monsoon. By late August, the atmosphere felt like a heavy, wet blanket draped over the canyons. The clouds began to stack up over the Mogollon Rim, a bruised electric purple that signaled a volume of water the sun-baked stone couldn't absorb. The sheriff, desperate to finalize the eviction before the winter storms made the high passes navigable, led a team of 5 men into the Red Canyon. He was following a trail May had left specifically for him, a trail that looked like a desperate escape route into a narrow one-way gorge. The storm broke with a violence that turned the sky into a dark, roaring weight. It wasn't a rain. It was a vertical wall of water that transformed the canyon floor into a kill zone in less than 8 minutes. A flash flood in the desert is a living entity, a thundering mass of red mud, boulders the size of cabins, and uprooted timber moving with the momentum of a falling mountain. Crane and his men were caught on a narrow limestone shelf 20 feet above the gorge floor. Behind them was a sheer wall of slick rock. In front of them was a rising tide of debris that grew a foot every 3 minutes. Their horses, bred for the stability of the plains, began to scream as the vibration of the coming water shook the very stone beneath their hooves. For the first time in 14 years, Aldous Crane was not the law. He was a man realizing that his ledger and his warrants were meaningless against the physics of a descending canyon. He was trapped. He looked at the rising red water, and then he looked up, and that was when he saw her. May Voss appeared on the opposite rim, 200 feet above the flood. She was mounted on a silver-gray stallion that stood perfectly still on the knife edge of the crumbling sandstone. The horse didn't startle at the lightning. It didn't flinch at the roar of the water. It looked down at the trapped men with the clinical, unhurried assessment of a creature that belonged to the heights. Crane shouted, his voice stripped away by the thunder. He waved his hat in a gesture of absolute surrender. He was a man who had spent 3 years trying to break this woman, and now he was offering her the very deeds he had confiscated just for a chance to breathe the morning air. He needed the ghost horses. They were the only animals in the territory with the technical foot vocabulary to navigate the shatter path, a nearly vertical ascent of loose stone and narrow ledges that was the only way out before the shelf was swallowed. May didn't move for 60 seconds. She waited until the water touched the stirrups of the sheriff's horse, ensuring the lesson of the land was fully recorded in his memory. Then she led 3 spare horses, tied in a gingerly managed line, down a descent that Crane would have sworn was a vertical drop. She moved with a rhythmic, quiet precision, her body a part of the stallion's micro-adjustments. She reached a secondary ledge 40 yards from the men, a point where the horses could be transferred, but the flood couldn't reach. She secured the horses to a deep-rooted juniper and backed her stallion into the mist. The horses were there. They were calm. They were the only bridge between a ledger of death and a chance at life. But as the sheriff and his deputies scrambled through the rising mud to reach the animals, they realized the final truth of their pursuit. The horses were free, but Mae Voss was already moving back up the cliff. She didn't wait for a confession. She didn't wait for a signature. By the time Crane hauled himself onto the back of a ghost mare and looked up at the rim, Mae was gone. The silver-gray stallion had vanished into the rain, as if he were a part of the storm's own shadow. The sheriff and his men survived, but the men who rode back into Cutter's Bend the following day were changed at a molecular level. They rode in silence on horses they didn't know how to command, animals that moved with a frightening intelligence, navigating the mud-slicked trails with an ease that made the men feel like ghosts in their own county. Crane went straight to the land office. He didn't go to file a seizure. He went to return the original deeds to the Voss name, to burn the notices of eviction, and to find a way to reconcile the 3 years he had spent trying to possess what he could never hope to understand. He found the Voss property empty. It wasn't just abandoned, it was scrubbed of his presence. Every trace of his warrants, every mark of his deputies, had been removed. The house was a silent shell of wood and dust. The only thing remaining was a single notebook, the 4th volume of her father's collection, resting on the kitchen table. Crane opened it to the final page. There, in Mae's steady, unwavering hand, was a message written for the man who had tried to take everything. It said that he had spent 3 years trying to own the animal without learning the terrain, and that he thought the horses were the property. But the horses were only the result of the land. It said that on the day he finally understood the value of the silence, she was already gone, because the land does not belong to the one with the paper, but to the one who stays long enough to hear what it says when the water rises. Mae Voss was never seen in the territory again. She didn't go to the cities. She didn't seek out a new claim. She simply became a part of the sandstone and the silence. The sheriff resigned his post 2 months after the flood. He spent the remainder of his life sitting on a chair in front of the general store, his eyes always fixed on the northern horizon where the red rocks met the sky. He never owned another horse. He was haunted by the realization that he had been the apprentice all along, and the only lesson he had truly learned was that authority is an illusion when it faces a person who has nothing left to lose but their integrity. Mae Voss didn't leave a trail of dust. She left a testament of what happens when knowledge meets the unwavering will of a soul that cannot be bought. If this journey through the red rocks and the silent canyons moved something within you today, don't let the fire go out. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell to ensure these whispers from the past are never silenced. We are building more than a channel. We are preserving the principles of the frontier. This is a place for those who know that the loudest truths are often spoken in silence. The legacy of Mae Voss didn't end with her disappearance. It lived on in the very horses Crane had tried to steal. The ghost strain continued to appear in the wild herds of the high plateau, a testament to a breeding program that was never about money, but about survival. The Aldrin Protocol, as it came to be known by the few who studied her father's notebooks, proved that you cannot confiscate knowledge. You can take the land, you can take the stables, and you can even take the animals, but you can never take the relationship between a person and the world they have learned to respect. Mae's 3-year journey was a masterclass in the art of the long game. She didn't fight the sheriff's deputies in the streets. She didn't waste her life in a courtroom. She waited for the territory to act as her judge and jury. She understood that in the grand architecture of the American West, the only thing that lasts is the truth of the terrain. The men who came to conquer the canyons were forgotten within a generation, their names washed away like the tracks of a valley horse in a rainstorm. But the story of the woman who was already gone remains. whispered in the wind that blows through the narrow passages of the Red Canyon, a reminder that the most durable form of rebellion is simply to be right and to be patient enough to let the world find out for itself. Aldous Crane died in 1902. In his final will, he didn't leave his money to his family or his land to the county. He left a small sum to be used for the maintenance of the Voss family cemetery, a place he had once tried to bulldoze. He finally understood that the stillness he had seen in Mae Voss wasn't a challenge. It was a reflection of the earth itself. He had spent his life trying to be a master of men, only to find out in the twilight of his years that the only mastery worth having was the kind that Mae Voss carried with her into the rocks, the ability to be a part of the world rather than its owner. The ghost horses still run. They say that if you venture deep enough into the unmapped silence of the territory, past the broken fences and where the maps turn white, you might see them. A flash of silver against the red rock, a movement so fluid it looks like a trick of the light. They are the living proof that when you have the courage to walk away from a rigged game, you find a world that no one can ever take from you again. If you believe that some things, like honor and true freedom, should never be for sale, then you belong here with us. Join our community by subscribing to Old West Legends and ensure these stories of unyielding spirit are never silenced by time. Leave a comment below with the word canyon if you stood with Mae until the very last mile. Your stories, your values, and your presence are the ones that keep the spirit of the West riding on. Even now, the memory of her silence is louder than the law. The land remains indifferent to the deeds and the titles, sheltering those who know how to walk without leaving a trace. Every spring, when the monsoons return to wash the valleys clean, the people of Cutter's Bend look toward the Red Canyon, wondering if the silver stallion will appear once more against the lightning. But Mae Voss and her ghost horses do not need to be seen to exist. They are the pulse of the frontier, the uncaptured heart of a territory that refuses to be tamed, a legacy written in the stone and carried by the wind forever. Long after the names of the territorial governors have been forgotten and the cattle syndicates have dissolved into bankruptcy, the people of the high country still speak of the woman who outstayed the sheriff. They don't speak of her as a hero, but as a fact, a fundamental part of the landscape that could not be reconciled with the ledgers. Her story is a reminder that the maps we draw are only temporary, and that the only permanent claim is the one built on respect for the land that outlasts us all. If you ever find yourself in the Red Canyon after a storm, when the air is thick with the scent of wet sage and the water is still carving its way through the stone, look toward the northern rim. You won't find a statue or a plaque, but you might find a trail that defies the trackers. And in that moment you will understand that Mae Voss never left. She simply waited for the world to stop trying to own her. The ghost horses are more than just a breed. They are a manifestation of the frontier's refusal to be catalogued. They represent the part of us that stays wild, the part that knows how to find the water in the drought and the path in the flood. To understand them is to understand the soul of the West, a soul that isn't found in the gold mines or the saloons, but in the quiet, patient observation of a world that owes us nothing and offers us everything. As we look back on these legends, we find that the most powerful figures were often the ones who never raised their voices. Mae Voss won her war through the clinical application of knowledge and the absolute management of her own presence. She proved that you don't need a posse to change the course of history. You just need to be the person who understands the terrain better than those who seek to rule it. Thank you for being part of this journey into the hidden history of the American frontier. Every story we share is a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of the land. Help us keep these legends alive by hitting the like button and sharing this story with someone who still believes in the old ways. Your support is the reason we can continue to dig deep into the archives and bring these voices back from the silence. Until the next trail opens, keep your eyes on the horizon and your spirit focused on the things that cannot be taken. Because in the end, we are all just travelers in a canyon that was here long before us, and will be here long after our names are gone. Ride on, and remember, the best stories aren't the ones we tell, but the ones the land remembers for us. The silence that followed May's departure from Cutter's Bend was not a void, it was an invitation. It invited the people of the territory to reconsider their relationship with authority and their understanding of ownership. It reminded them that the ultimate jurisdiction doesn't belong to the territorial office, but to the forces of nature that move the mountains and fill the valleys. May Voss was the architect of that invitation, and her legacy is the quiet, steady persistence of those who choose to live by the rules of the terrain rather than the rules of the ledger. Even the basalt rocks of the Red Canyon seem to carry the echo of her horse's hooves, a cadence that is as much a part of the stone as the minerals that color it. The ghost line became the standard by which all other canyon horses were measured, not because they were the fastest, but because they were the most integrated. They were the physical embodiment of May's knowledge, a knowledge that she left behind not in a library, but in the very blood of the high plateau. When we consider the life of May Voss, we are forced to confront our own assumptions about success and failure. Was she a failure because she lost her property? Or was she a success because she gained her freedom and preserved a legacy that no court could ever touch? The answer, like the ghost horses themselves, is found in the eye of the observer. But for those who have spent a night under the desert stars, hearing the wind move through the sandstone fenders, the answer is as clear as the morning light on the Mogollon Rim. She stayed until she had nothing left to lose, and in doing so, she became invincible. She showed the sheriff that a man can only take what a person is willing to give, and that a soul that has integrated with the land is beyond the reach of any warrant. That is the ultimate legend of the Voss property, a legend that continues to inspire those who find themselves standing in rooms where the law is being read against them, reminding them that their gravity is their own, and their story is far from over. As the 20th century dawned and the Iron Horse began to cross the plains, the world of May Voss and the ghost horses seemed to shrink in the eyes of the many. But for the few who still knew how to read the ground, the world remained as vast as ever. They knew that the technology of the cities could never replace the physical intelligence of a canyon horse, and that the knowledge contained in the Voss notebooks was more relevant than ever. The Red Canyon still holds its secrets, sheltering the descendants of the silver-gray stallion and the woman who taught him to read the stone. They are the guardians of a frontier that exists not on a map, but in the heart of anyone who refuses to be tamed. And as long as the monsoons continue to wash the valleys clean and the lightning illuminates the high rims, the legend of May Voss will endure, a steady pulse in the stone, a whisper in the sage, and a flash of silver against the red rock. The wind that blows through Cutter's Bend tonight carries the same scent of sage and cedar that May Voss knew 100 years ago. It moves across the empty pastures of the old Voss property, unhindered by fences that have long since rotted away. It is a free wind, a wind that acknowledges no deeds and respects no boundaries. It is the wind of the ghost horses, and it tells us that the West is not a place in the past, but a state of mind that remains as open and as challenging as the Red Canyon itself. So if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, feeling the weight of the world's ledgers pressing down on you, remember May Voss. Remember the stillness she carried in the land office and the clinical precision she applied to her survival. Remember that the land outlasts the law and that integrity is the only coin that retains its value in the flood. Take a breath, look toward the horizon, and listen to what the terrain is telling you, because your story, like hers, is written in something more durable than ink. It is written in the very stone of your soul. Ride on, Old West legends. The trail is long, the canyon is deep, but the view from the rim is worth every mile. We'll see you at the next water source, where the legends gather and the truth remains as clear as a mountain spring. Until then, keep your seat light, your hands steady, and your heart open to the secrets of the frontier. The ghost horses are waiting, and the story has only just begun.